Hello, everybody. I'm Robert Barton, and welcome to today's webinar on small woodlot management, overcoming challenges. We're going to get started here. Quick logistical slide. Today's slides are available on the page you joined from, and I'll post that link again here in the chat just in a minute. And you'll be able to download those so that you can follow along if you'd like. We will be taking questions today. You can ask those questions using the Q&A feature of Zoom. Just go ahead and click on that Q&A icon and enter your questions there, and we will get to them with our presenters towards the end of today's presentation. If you run into technical difficulty or other issues, please put that in the chat to me as the host, and I'll try my best to work with you through the chat to resolve any issues that might be going on. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our sponsor and host today, Leslie McCormick with the North Carolina Tree Farm Program. Leslie?
Thank you, Bob, and thank you all for being here with us today. Our speakers today are Mark Bost and Dr. Mark McGallis. Mark Bost is an NC State University forest management graduate who worked at the university's Forest Nutrition Cooperative before beginning a career with the North Carolina Forest Service. After retiring 2 years ago, Mark now works as a private consulting forester. He's involved with the North Carolina Tree Farm Program, Quail Forever, the Sandhills Prescribed Burn Association, and other organizations where he focuses his work on forest management, wildlife habitat improvement, urban forestry, ecosystem restoration, and conservation. Dr. Mark McGallis is a founding board member and current chair of the Working Lands Trust, which focuses on maintaining sustainable food, fiber, and community. After retiring from a career with NC State University's Extension Forestry, Mark served 3 years as executive director of the National Woodland Owners Association and now serves as that organization's policy consultant, monitoring policy, regulation, and lawmaking processes on the national scale. Thank you, Mark and Mark, for being with us today and leading our discussion on overcoming the challenges of small woodlot management. Before we get started, I want to make everyone aware of a couple of events that we have coming up with the North Carolina Tree Farm Program. Our annual meeting will be on April 24th at First Fruits Farm in Lewisburg. And our topics for that will be agritourism, pond management, bird and wildlife habitat management, sustained yield forest management, tree genetics, and conservation easements. If you're interested in learning more about that or registering for that event, you can go to our website at nctreefarm.org and follow a link on the homepage to the registration information. We also will be hosting a third quarter webinar on September 18th on pond management, and look for more details on that when we get closer to the date. And with that, I'll turn it over to the two Marks, and thank you for leading our discussion.
Okay, just give me 1 second here. Make sure I got this stuff the way I need to have it here. Let's see here. Does that look good, Dr. Barton?
Yep, looks fine for me.
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Dr. McGallis for the first few slides.
Welcome, everybody. I've just got a few comments to make. The biggest ones are glad to be here for the Tree Farm folks, Extension Forestry, but really in support of Mark Bost, who I view as one of the best foresters I've ever met and known. I may have the doctor title, but he's got the experience in the woods. So both of us spent a lot of time with the Forest Service. Me, I think, was 7 or 8 years, Mark his whole career, but that service component, you know, is still what we live and breathe. So the first slide that Mark's going to show us is one he picked up probably from the it could be anywhere in the Piedmont. It's an image of the title says forest fragmentation. Is it up yet, Mark? There you go. We're going to come back to this in a little while, but for those of you looking at from home, you can see the biggest tracts have some sign of forest management on them, and it's easier to get it done on a big tract. But what we'll talk about today are some tricks and secrets that we've learned, and one of the big ones is patience. And we'll talk about what's happening in North Carolina. In waiting for the webinar to start, I went and found an article from just 3 days ago. And it says by 2030, North Carolina will be the 7th most populous state in the country. And we'll see some aerial photos to show how much we've been urbanized. But at that point, and we're in 2025, so in the next 5 years, they estimate we'll have 11.7 million people coming to the state. And by that time, almost half, 47%, will have been born outside of North Carolina. Now, I'm not a native, but my kids are, so I try to have some legitimacy there. If that doesn't scare you enough, in the 35 years, by 2060, it's estimated we'll add another 4.3 million people to our population. And if that's hard to conceive of, just think of adding another triangle and another triad in 35 years. What will those people eat? Where will they live? And how will it affect what we consider the North Carolina rural economy or rural environment that we live in? So let's go to the next slide, and we'll kind of put North Carolina in perspective. Now, a lot of folks hate graphs, but I just want you to think about that right side. And it talks about the states, the high on the bottom. These are states that are in the greatest threat of conversion of agriculture and forest lands to urban areas, usually house sites, but any kind of urban. So New Jersey at the top is no surprise in green. North Carolina in the middle is where we are. And then Texas beneath us. So I think Texas is ahead of us slightly. If not, it's close enough. But what do those boxes mean? On the left-hand side, we talk about policy. North Carolina is kind of in the middle with our response to the loss of forest and especially farmland. We've got rules in place and also programs to help protect and preserve forest and farmland. And so we're in the middle of the pack as far as the policy goes. We haven't been at it as long as in New Jersey that's looked at that threat, but we're certainly ahead of Texas and many of those other southern states, the Sun Belt, where people from the north are moving and just new people are shifting around. So Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, those areas are a lot like us. But we're kind of in the lead, and I hope some of the numbers show that. Let's go to the next slide, Mark. So back to back, we'll show what it looks like the year I was born. You could kind of pick out Charlotte, the Triad, and a little bit of Raleigh. But if we zoom forward to something closer to the present, this is housing units per square kilometer now. And so you can see, if we start in Atlanta, that's that red heart, the largest population or city in the South. But Charlotte's right behind it. And in between is that Greenville, Spartanville complex. But if you're an interstate driver, you can kind of pick out I-85 and I-40. And that's pretty much where that growth is going to take place. There was one other thing from that article that kind of drives the point home. It said that shortly, Lee and Harnett County, for those of you in the Triangle area, will soon switch from rural to urban counties. And I think Johnson's already on the way there. And you can see that big red blob below the purple blob that is Raleigh area. So let's see what else we got, Mark, and if we got any messages going forth. One of the things that first slide talked about was fragmentation, and this is something we face when families have no legacy plan or even a will to pass on their lands. In many cases, they want to be equitable and split up the lands to the siblings or the survivors. And maybe your eyes are starting to see brick-like or long, thin tracks. This is where fragmentation comes into play. And as Mark is going to talk to you about, as you get a little track and subdivide it and subdivide it and subdivide it again, it becomes increasingly hard, not necessarily impossible to manage forestry there. But one of the things that will change, instead of getting a sustainable income from the land, you may actually have to pay or barter for management practices to take place there. And we'll have some examples for that. But if you have a track like that, start thinking about your questions. If we're not covering it in Mark's presentation, we'll go from there. So Mark, you're the expert. I'm going to let you take it away from here. I hope that's the setup that we talked about.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that. So I guess when I was working in my career with the North Carolina Forest Service, it didn't take me long into the career to realize that we were getting a lot of requests from landowners that had smaller and smaller tracts. So this topic is kind of near and dear to my heart as far as the difficulty of trying to manage increasingly smaller tracts of land. After I retired and started trying to do consultant forestry, I think most of the landowners that had big tracts of land already had consultant foresters that they worked with a lot. I'm not getting a lot of calls for people that own large blocks of woodland, but I do get a lot of calls from landowners that say, I have 5 acres, I have 8 acres, I have 22 acres of pine plantation that I would like to get thinned, that I've been trying to get thinned for a few years and haven't had any luck. And so those are the kinds of calls that I get. Just since we did a practice session on this webinar a couple of days ago, I wrote down 2 more landowners that I need to go try to take a look at their properties that have what most people would consider small tracts of woodland that they want to do some forest management in. And so if I don't accomplish anything else with my message today, I hope that I challenge each of you in the audience to think outside the box on ways to get stuff done on smaller tracts, and realize that most of the time there is a way to get from point A to point B. It may be different than the way that things were normally done, but there is usually a way to accomplish your goals as a landowner, even on small tracts. You just may have to do some things and make some decisions in ways that are unconventional. So I put this slide up: what issues and challenges do small woodlot owners have? And if you're in the audience and you're a small woodlot owner, you know the answers to those. I'll give you some examples of stuff that landowners tell me. Small scale harvesting is a challenge. Getting tracts thinned, and when I'm talking about a small woodlot, let's try to define that for North Carolina. That can be in the eyes of the beholder. Some landowners that have 20 or 30 acres, are having difficulty getting traditional forest management work done on their land. And you could be talking about a small woodlot owner as even somebody that owns a lot of land, but is trying to manage a small section of that property. So I could be working with a landowner that has 100 acres of land, but he put 8 acres of pine of former agricultural fields into the Conservation Reserves Program, 25 years ago, and he's been trying to get that thin for a while. And so for him, that section of his land that he owns is a small woodlot. These are some of the typical management prescriptions or things that I see most people with small woodlots, small pieces of woodland call me about. Small scale timber harvest or thinning. The landowner, the property owner may recognize that they've got some trees that are over mature or overcrowded that they need to do some work in. Sometimes they would like to be able to derive some income from the sale of timber if that's a possible opportunity for them. I get calls from landowners who are concerned about insect and disease problems on their land. Of course, a few years ago, we went through the emerald ash borer outbreak, and we never realized that there were so many ash trees in some of these woodlots until we started seeing them die. And some of the challenges of dealing with stuff like that. Overcrowded pine stands in North Carolina are always prone to Ips beetle or pine beetle attack, and it's not uncommon for a landowner that has a small woodlot to call and reach out and try to be dealing with a forest health issue like that. Forest fragmentation and the slide that we showed that Mark talked about with decreasing parcel sizes. So a lot of property owners have bought tracts in North Carolina that have woodland, and they have put a primary residence out on that property. I used to be a service forester for Orange County, and I worked out of the Hillsborough district office, and a lot of Orange County is made up of 10 and 20 and 30 acre tracts of land that the person who bought that tract put a really nice home kind of right in the middle of that tract, and they're dealing with even more fragmentation around their property. And so visual buffers, noise buffers along the road are always something that these small woodlot owners seem interested in learning about. I actually met a landowner last week that had a pretty good sized piece of woodland that he was managing, but his neighbor started clearing off some of his property and is going to put some houses over there. So even though he had never thought it was his objective, instantly one of his number one objective became to determine what he could do to try to block some of the view from the edge of his property to his neighbor's property. Establishing trees on a small woodlot, doing hazard tree assessments, improving wildlife habitat, even for landowners that have small woodlots, trying to maintain wildlife habitat. Some of them are real interested in the opportunities to hunt deer on a small piece of property that they own. But I find that more and more of the kind of people that call me that are close to me have a real interest in songbird habitat, maintaining habitat, improving habitat for pollinators. A lot of these small woodlot owners are kind of like homesteader type of minded people that want to raise chickens, that want to raise bees, and they're interested in managing small woodlots with a focus on maintaining and improving habitat for non-traditionally managed wildlife species. Controlling invasive species. If you own woodland, regardless of size, and your tract is being impacted by invasive species of plants, it's pretty easy for a landowner to recognize that they've got a challenge right there and that they need to do something. A little place of kudzu can turn into a big place of kudzu or privet, or we see a lot of other non-native invasive species around here. And I find a lot of small woodlot owners that are real interested in doing something with that. And they're willing to put in the legwork to try to take care of some of those problems. When you're talking about small scale harvesting or trying to get harvesting on a small scale or thinning done, most North Carolina Forest Service districts maintain a list of small woodlot timber buyers. At the end of these slides, I'll try to share my screen on an internet browser and help you navigate to some of those, the links to some of those for what would be your area. I think Dr. Barden's going to put a couple of website links in the chat session of how you can navigate to some of these lists. And some of those small woodlot timber buyers lists, you know, they're people that the districts have identified, have kind of called and queried about their interest that a timber buyer has in doing small tracts. And so that doesn't necessarily mean if you call them and you say, hey, I've got 11 acres of blah, blah pine, I want to get thinned, that they're going to jump right on it and do it. But that means that they have said they would be interested in talking to landowners that do have small woodlots. The districts also maintain a good list of consulting foresters that work in your area. And although sometimes for a private consulting forester trying to help a landowner that has, you know, 5 or 10 or 15 acres of woodland that they want to manage is not a real viable thing for them to do based on the financial benefit to the consultant. But most consultant foresters, especially if they're pretty close and local to a small tract, should be willing to at least talk to you and help you make decisions or help you identify things that you might be able to do to get some small scale harvesting done. I've got a list, I've got a notepad with 15 or 20 landowners written down and all their contact information, and some of them I've made maps for, but that I don't think I can help them get things done right now. But if I do have a harvest somewhere in the immediate vicinity of their tract, or if I find out that there's a logging operation going on somewhere close by, it may be a possibility at some time in the future. So if you have a small tract that you want to do some harvesting on or some thinning, reaching out to the consultants that are pretty close to your tract and asking them if they can place you on a list or notify you if they have a sale somewhere in your area and they think that there could be a logger that could do a good job that's close to you, could help. The districts also make those lists of timber buyers that they have, you know, it is possible to reach out to some timber buyers also on things like that, that if you can find out if they're reputable and let them know you're interested in doing a harvest. Some of them may not be willing to jump right on it and get it done in a timely manner, but they may be able to keep you in mind if they have something going on in your area that's close. I have a tract down in just south of here in Montgomery County that was a real small tract that a lady wanted to get thinned, and I became aware of a thinning job that through another consultant forester that was close to there, and it looks like I'm going to have an opportunity to get the that landowner's tract thinned, and when we really didn't think that was going to be possible to get done. This picture is one I took just because I did have a landowner that was trying to do some land clearing, actually pretty close to another tract that I was harvesting, and they had gotten I'll call him a logger, but he was really a land clearing contractor, was cutting some trees off of the tract and noticed that they had a pretty nice pile of cedar logs laying there. And I talked the logger into selling me a load of these cedar logs, and this is right behind my little pickup truck on a little trailer that I had, a 16-foot trailer. I think there's 9 logs on that trailer, and I got those picked up. He took his loader and put them right on my trailer, and then I hauled them straight to a portable, a small bandsaw mill close to my house. That's the a couple days later, after he's loading that lumber on my trailer. And the reason I wanted to put these slides on here is because I have met a lot of landowners with small woodlots that had an interest in doing some harvesting on a small scale that weren't having any luck getting anybody to cut it. But we were able to talk through some of the options for them of utilizing some of those trees that they wanted to sell in a way that would benefit them and actually take out a couple of steps in the supply chain to getting those logs from point A to point B. So sometimes for a landowner, and I met one just a couple of days ago that had 4 acres, and it had been kind of high graded and picked through, but there was some scattered really nice pines on the track. And I talked to the landowner about the possibility of hiring somebody to cut those trees and pull them up to a field on his property, then hiring somebody with a portable sawmill to come saw those nice logs up into some lumber. And if something like that can be worked out, then you've taken what would have been a stumpage value that you were not able to realize and convert it to a product value. And for a lot of homeowners or landowners that have small tracts, they may have to actually pay somebody to cut those trees. They may have to pay somebody to saw the lumber for them. But then they've got a product that's a lot more valuable to sell than the product that they had on the stump that they weren't able to get sold in the first place. And so that can be a possibility. You could even take that product value one step further if you can take that lumber and make something out of it and sell it. So I have had some landowners that were successful at that. A lot of times, even in a small woodlot, you have a really good resource there that you can utilize, but you just have to think and it may not have a lot of value on the stump to the landowner, but if you can convert that resource to a product, then it can become very valuable. So I had a little bit of money in buying these few logs. I had a few $100s paid to the gentleman running that skid steer right there to saw that stuff into lumber. Got it back to my house, stacked it up real pretty, covered it up for a length of time. And I was able to sell, a part of that lumber, just roughly half of it, for the amount of money that I had in the logs and the lumber. Then I still had the other half of lumber to do whatever I wanted to with. If you have something really nice, like some really nice big pine logs, this cedar, these weren't exceptional, but they were better than average. Even a few walnut trees or something really nice, some really nice, pretty straight, clean oak, and you can process it into a product like that. It's usually really easy to sell that. Does require some investment if you're paying somebody to cut or if you're paying somebody to saw, but and then it does require some, storage. You have to put some spacers in between the lumber right there and stack it up in a pretty flat spot, cover it up with something so that the rain doesn't get on it. And then it does require some time to dry, and some knowledge of wood drying and how to take care of a product like that. But there's, at least around here, you can put an ad on Facebook Marketplace, or you can go to one of these woodworking stores that have a lot of, most time they're older gentlemen that have plenty of money, that have their own wood shops, that love to buy lumber from local sources if they can get it. Stuff like this, or stuff that you could saw off of a small woodlot in the Piedmont, North Carolina, if it had a few nice old shortleaf pine or something like that, or some really pretty red oak boards or something like that, is very, very expensive to try to buy. And it's almost impossible to get. You can't go down to Lowe's or Home Depot or somewhere like that and buy stuff like this. So there is a lot of demand for that. And if you do a little research on what lumber like that goes for, you can see that there is a way to transfer stuff like that on your property to some pretty good money if you take out some of the steps of the supply chain that a landowner would normally use if they were selling timber on a stump. Okay. Just a thought there. I'll try to show you a link to some of the small woodlot timber buyers and some of the portable sawmill operators here in just a minute.
Hey, Mark, let me ask you something. Are we talking about 4 or 5 times more than the stumpage, or 8 or 10 times? I know it's dependent, but give the folks an idea on that.
Well, for most timber sales, you know, you have to be able to have a merchantable timber sale in this area. You have to overcome for stumpage. You have to be able to overcome the cost that a timber buyer and a logger would have of moving a loader and a skidder and a cutter to the track. And that can cost, you know, most loggers tell me that's close to $8,000 just to move all the equipment over there and then move it back wherever it came from. And so if you don't have 15 or 20 acres, a lot of times you can't get a lot of interest on a timber sale with stumpage, at least around here, unless it's really, really, really nice timber. Or unless you're close to a mill, or unless you're close to a logger's house, or unless you're just in a really good geographical area, or you catch a logging job close. But you can easily take stumpage value on shortleaf pine, which a really nice, pretty, you know, 18-inch diameter, 3-log shortleaf pine in this area might be on the stump worth $100, $150 to a landowner, and turn it to several $100s worth of lumber really easily. And what I tell landowners sometimes, especially if they say, well, I'll ask the question, do you have any aspirations to build anything on this property? Do you have any aspirations to build a garage or a shed or a barn for your livestock or anything like that? And if they answer that question with a yes, they would be 100 times better off to take those logs that they want to sell and process them into lumber and save that lumber to build something like that on their property than they ever would be to sell it for stumpage value. Because if they take whatever money they have and turning their logs into lumber and try to go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy lumber, it's going to be, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 times more expensive to buy the lumber at the store than it would be to pay somebody to process it for you. So yeah, good question. You've taken, and you're also producing lumber that's generally going to be of higher quality than most of the stuff that you buy in a lumber store. If you go in Lowe's and look at a 2x4, you're going to see the pith or close to the pith in almost every board. That's fast grown plantation wood. It's everybody knows how those boards will warp and cup and stuff on you, and compared to the quality of some of the lumber growing in some of these small woodlots in North Carolina, there's no comparison there. You could actually take that stuff and turn it into a product. And I have a lot of, it would probably surprise you how many small woodlot owners that you have. I talked about a lot of them are interested in homesteading and stuff like that, that have an interest in woodworking and doing stuff and making stuff. This is just an example of stuff I piddle around with in the shop and make out of some of that cedar. This was a sewing table with a little recessed place in there so that the sewing machine could sit down in there flush, and they could work the cloth, you know, flush with the top of the table. These are little swings that I can make out of even real small boards. You know, you're just cutting strips out. So a lot of times some of the trimming and edges off of some of the lumber that you square up can still be used to make something like that. And then you've taken it from a raw product to a usable product and then a finished product like that. And then the sky's the limit for the difference in the value of something like that. If you have a little talent, and I don't, at turning some of this stuff into a usable product. As mentioned, I think there will be a link that most districts maintain. It's not hard to find somebody close to you that has one of these. Sometimes they will, you know, bring the mill to your site. If they're willing to do that, it's really, really helpful if you have the logs stacked up really easy to get to. And if they give you a price per hour or per board foot that they'll saw that stuff into lumber for you, it usually helps if you have a couple people there to help move the boards out of the way so that you're paying the sawyer to saw lumber and not move wood out of the way. There's actually just right here within a radius of my house, you know, 3 or 4 people that I know that have these. Of course, firewood is a product that can be used in small woodlots, especially like if you're doing cull tree removal or you're trying to utilize some of the stuff that's lower quality. It's pretty easy to sell firewood too. Have a lot of landowners that do that. One of the biggest challenges that small woodlot owners face is keeping stands at a healthy density. You know, there's probably nothing better that you can do if you're managing any piece of woodland than trying to maintain healthy stocking levels of trees. And so trees naturally regenerate with more stems per acre than you would like for them to most of the time. And if you can, you know, control the spacing of the trees, you can maintain forest health and productivity and add volume and growth to the best trees on your tract in that manner. And so I tell a lot of landowners, you get the same amount of volume growth in a forest stand, whether you're dividing that volume growth up into 2,000 or 3,000 stems per acre or 300 or 400 of the best stems that you have. So a lot of times cull tree removing lower quality trees and utilizing them for whatever you can help maintain the health of your stand. We talked about insect and disease control. Of course, the Forest Service can come out and do an exam if you make a request to your local Forest Service office and look at your woodlot to determine stand health. This is a ranger in Durham County quite a long time ago now. Looking at it was just an acre or two of trees in a lady's yard, and we found black turpentine, Ips beetle. We actually found a lightning strike right in the middle of that. And we highly encouraged that lady to try to get somebody over there to cut those trees and to utilize those trees while they were still solid enough to process into something. That's a common thing that you see and a common challenge that you see when you're talking about small woodlot management. I talked just briefly earlier about visual noise buffers. Real common prescription is to hand plant 1 or 2 rows of loblolly pine beside 1 or 2 rows of eastern red cedar. I like to stick with the native species of trees that grow good in your area, that maintain their foliage during the wintertime. You see a lot of buffers planted around subdivisions and stuff with Leland cypress and other species of evergreen trees. Cryptomeria is another one. Some of those species that aren't native are especially prone to weird diseases. And sometimes when they're 8 or 10 years old and there's a really good buffer effect going on, you'll see the Leland cypress start to turn brown in the lower part of their canopy, and then all of a sudden there'll be a strip of dead ones in there. And so there's the list of diseases that some of these non-native species of trees can get are long, and I've had really good luck sticking with the native species of trees. And most of those native trees can be ordered from the nursery 1888 NC Trees. A lot of times you have to order them shortly after July 1st to make sure you get them, because they tend to sell out of some of those real quick. But there's other nurseries that supply trees and native shrubs. I like wax myrtle, especially if you're east of here, you know, the middle of the Piedmont. That's an evergreen shrub that stays green all winter and can get real nice and bushy and provide a good hedge. You see that planted along road edges in front of solar farms and stuff like that. There's lots of good ones, and there's lots of nurseries that provide small potted evergreen plants and even some bare root seedlings. There's one close to here. It's Mallow Marsh Nursery in Chatham County. Usually has a good stock of eastern red cedar and wax myrtle and other shrubs that are native, that maintain green foliage during the wintertime. Probably the most important thing, and I mentioned this just a minute ago, is, you know, trying to thin overcrowded stands. And sometimes you really have to realize when you're talking about a small woodlot, that it may not be possible to get a logger in there to do a thinning at any time. You know, if you're talking about 3 or 4 acres, even if the trees are far beyond what would normally consider to be merchantable to get a logger to go in there and remove, there's just not enough acreage there to do it. And sometimes to turn that stand into what you want it to look like a few years down the road and to maintain the health of the stand, you have to get out a chainsaw and do something like this. Very unsightly. This is a mixed poplar with sweet gum stand in the Piedmont of North Carolina that had 3,000 or 4,000 stems per acre. And they went in there and picked out the best 300 or 400 and cut everything else. And what this will allow this stand to do is the crowns of the trees that have been left will respond to the additional sunlight. The foliage directly translates into how much diameter the trees can put on and how healthy they are and how resistant they are to insect and disease attacks. And, you know, thinning overcrowded stands is probably one of the most important things that you can do on any size woodlot to maintain the health and productivity and good growth of a forest. We've got lots of pictures. There's another picture of somebody thinning an overcrowded pine stand that probably naturally regenerated with a brush saw crew. Those brush saw blades on a big weed eater can make fast work of thinning like that in a scenario like that. This slide was actually focusing on improving wildlife habitat. Anytime you can thin a pine stand and get some sunlight to the forest floor, you can improve wildlife habitat because you can allow some herbaceous plants to become established in the understory that are particularly beneficial for wildlife for food and cover. Prescribed burning, if it can be done, is another really good practice. You know, go through your North Carolina Forest Service county ranger and ask for an exam. They'll let you know if it's something that can be considered on your property. Sometimes on small woodlots where there's been a lot of forest fragmentation, this practice cannot be done because of smoke management issues, but sometimes it can. Planting food plots. See a lot of small landowners that really their main objective is improving wildlife habitat. The Wildlife Resources Commission has biologists that will come out and look at your property, provide a prescription for you based on your objectives and try to help you with stuff like that. And a lot of us foresters have been out with the wildlife biologists so many times that we have a good handle on what a common prescription would be, you know, based on your tract. I'll go through these real quickly because I know that Dr. Barton wants me to finish in time to leave some room for questions and stuff. And I was hoping to still have a minute to show you some of those links. Invasive species it's very, very hard to get on a piece of property in North Carolina and not find some of these things. And sometimes something like privet just kind of punking along the edge of a field that you have really didn't spread a lot or do anything until you go into the stand adjacent to it and start to do some management and do some thinning or do some harvesting and open up some of the adjacent stand with some sunlight. And that stuff can spread in there and take over the world and smother out anything good that you would try to grow after that. So attacking those things before you do management is a good practice. That website there is the link to the U.S. Forest Service invasive species manual, and it has you can flip through there and find good herbicide recommendations and management recommendations on any non-native or invasive species of plant that you have. I will say that on this topic, you know, some of these things that you can find on small woodlots or any size woodlot can really be a big deal if you don't address them, if you're trying to do management. You know, I don't even have to tell anybody here about kudzu and how bad that can get if you leave it uncontrolled. Chinese wisteria is one we see a lot. Privet, tree of heaven, most of those are battles you can win if you're willing to put the effort and the herbicide into working on them. Some of them are not. I have a lot of tracks the understory gets smothered with Japanese stiltgrass, and that's one that's a very, very, very hard battle to win. And sometimes you just have to be able to win it long enough to get something growing out there and just tolerate the additional invasive species that you have. New opportunities and thinking outside the box. I love this slide because this was one of the first silvopastures that I ever saw put in, and I'll give old consultant forester that I used to work with a long time ago, Tim Jackson, credit for this particular tract because the landowner wanted to grow trees. He wanted to focus on some saw timber growth, but he also wanted to maintain some hay production. This was in Sampson County on a kind of a small tract. This one piece was, but he had a field that he had been mowing for hay. And what we did on this one was we did site preparation and planted loblolly pine on a 10 by 10 foot space and 2 rows of loblolly pine, and then skipped a corridor of about 60 feet where he was able to maintain hay production in there. And he kept mowing hay, and he kept good records of the coastal Bermuda hay that he mowed out of those corridors until the point that the trees got up a good little bit taller than they were in this picture. And then he was able to put the cows back in there and graze cows underneath the canopy of the 2 rows of loblolly pine that he planted. Those 2 rows of trees, when you give each row all the sunlight it wants on one side of it, they do not prune their lower limbs very well. So they did have to go in there twice and do pruning treatments on those loblolly pine to keep good form and to keep a good clean log, in the log and a half on the base of the tree. But that stand is still there and probably about 20 years old right now, and it looks good. Those are some things that, different ideas of things that you can do. There's lots of them. That's just one. And that's pretty much the end of my presentation there with my tree planting crew of my oldest daughter and my son a long, long time ago at Jordan Lake, planting some longleaf pine in the cutover that are now about 20 years old. And so I'm going to try to see if I can share my screen one more time and show you some of the links. Can anybody tell me if it looks like you can see my web browser there?
Yep.
Okay. So this is just the Forest Service homepage. And if you go to the homepage and you click on the word programs, whoops, that's not right. If you scroll down the homepage, it looks different when I've got this little bar over here with the Zoom meeting thing. You scroll down to managing your forest, and you click there, and you go to who can help, the very first drop down, and you go to private forestry service providers. Then you have to know which district your track is in, and there's another map, with the agency contact page right there to tell you where which district you're in. But let's just say for Lexington, I'm in the Lexington district. Right there is a small woodlot timber buyers list, a list that the district has tried to maintain of loggers that have said they would consider doing small tracks. Here's this guy right here, Josh Kepley, says no minimum acres. We'll work in all surrounding counties, free estimate. Some of them, sometimes I'll see them say minimum of 10 acres or minimum of 5, but they have queried this list to try to identify loggers or timber buyers that have said they would do small scale work. Here's their list of portable sawmill operators. These are scattered out around the district there. You could pick somebody that's close to you and call them and talk to you and see what they would charge to process some of your logs into lumber. This isn't necessarily all of them. Those are just the ones that they knew of that said they were willing to get calls from landowners. And so most of the districts do maintain a list like that. There's one for the Hillsborough district. I don't know what it looks like, but I'm sure it's, yeah, there's a good number of them on there. So especially for a logger, if you have a small tract, if it's pretty close to their house, sometimes they'll do it, especially when times are lean or they really need something to do. Sometimes when you're not able to get something done today, just waiting a month or 6 months or a year can be all the difference in the world. I've had a lot of really small tracts that I've told the landowner, I don't think there's going to be a real good chance that I can help you sell timber on this tract, that I was able to work out later on because I got wind of the fact that one of the timber buyers needed something to do. I got a call from a timber buyer just a few months ago, said, have you got anything we could move a logger onto? I've got a logger that needs somewhere to go. And I reminded the timber buyer that I had tried to send him a notice of a small tract pretty close to there, a few months ago. And he said, yep, I forgot about that. I'll go look at it today and I'll work something up and see what we can do. And I was actually able to sell a 6 acre tract of pretty nice timber over in Rockingham County for $18,000 for a lady that had almost decided she was just going to pay a contractor to clear those trees off of that tract because she wanted to convert that 6 acres into some pasture land for livestock. So sometimes it's just a matter of good timing or catching the market when things are better. That could mean the opportunity to get something done when you had thought you weren't going to be able to get something done. So I feel like I've talked enough. I went a little over my goal of finishing a few minutes earlier than this for questions, but I'll turn it over. Mark, do you have anything that you want to add to what I said?
I think being creative was the take-home message, whether it's for your own firewood use or even that thinning example or pre-commercial thinning that you showed. To cut down a small tree is something a homeowner or a small landowner can do. When they get big, that's when you've got to find solutions and professionals to do it. The thing I would say too, as a small property owner, don't waste a good opportunity, whether that's a hurricane that pushes down a tree or in the case of us, we had a dry lightning storm that just set on our neighborhood and took out about 16 trees. One of them was a big oak, and having a friend like Mark to help me cut it down, it became firewood and would use high-end wood that I could use for projects and things. So don't miss an opportunity, especially if it looks like a challenge or a disaster at the beginning.
And don't hesitate to make some phone calls and talk to your local Forest Service office, and let them know what you're trying to get accomplished, or talk to a consultant forester or a timber buyer that's close to you that you trust, and let them know what you want to do and see if there's a way they can help you.
So with that, let's jump into some questions here. We have a few minutes left. Our first question: what are the tax implications selling boards as opposed to selling lumber?
And I can handle that one. It's a little bit more challenging, but you're able to deduct those costs. So the logging costs will come off the top. The sawing costs that Mark talked about, whether you deliver it to someone or bring in a sawmill, that's a cost, and they're going to come off the sale of your product. The biggest difference, however, though, is going to be those boards are going to sell as ordinary income. So you're going to pay the full taxable amount on that versus a timber sale where you could get capital gains treatment.
All right, thank you. Here's a question related to thinning contracts. Thinning contracts are a challenge. The larger tracts, 100+ acres, are difficult enough. Any thoughts for a 27 acre, 18 acres harvestable in Person County and or 16 acres in Warren County that you could share?
I get those kind of calls a lot. It's really hard. Thinning, it's sometimes of the year. The pulpwood market, you know, goes up and down and changes quite dramatically. And I know that a lot of you have seen on the news that there was a reduction in the capacity of a big pulpwood mill down in eastern North Carolina and a closing of a large pulpwood mill up in western North Carolina. And even though you would normally think that probably shouldn't impact landowners in Person County, because there's a couple of mills right up there that take pulpwood. It does, because what that does is it puts more pressure on the edges of the normal procurement range for the mills that can accept pulpwood to accept more from outside of the area that they normally would. And so a lot of these mills, these pulpwood mills, have said, we've got so many people wanting to bring us pulpwood from different parts of the state, even if it's a long trucking distance, that we really don't need to try to procure a lot of pulpwood on the stump, even if it's pretty close to us. Now that can change dramatically with weather. If it turns off wet and it goes to raining and some of these loggers have to hold up and they're not able to get in the woods and do thinning and harvest pulpwood and get it to the mill, and you've got a tract that's pretty good ground that's close to a road, then you may be able to get a much smaller tract than normal done. But I would say the only solution I've had is to try to talk to a consultant and see if he can lump it in with some other thinning that he may have in the area. Talk to some timber buyers. When you're driving down the road, if you see a logger that looks like he's doing a good job of thinning close to you, talk to him. You may have to be willing to accept a much lower price per unit or per acre or however they're going to sell than you normally would. But sometimes the benefit of getting an overcrowded stand thinned out, you know, for the long-term health and productivity of that stand far outweighs a little bit of loss of income, you know, something like that. I've even had landowners that were really focused on wildlife habitat offer to pay a logger to do thinning on a really small tract, you know, just so they could get it done and get some sunlight to the ground and get it set up better for deer and turkeys. So
Yeah, and I would just add, if there's a clear cut nearby or a harvest operation that you could piggyback to, and that's where being on the front of somebody's mind, whether it's a consulting forester or a timber buyer in the area, they'll start remembering that you've got that 27 acres that they could put a logger on and stretch the cost, that mobilization or demobilization cost, onto another tract, and you can be the beneficiary.
and talk to your neighbors and see if any of your neighbors have any interest in doing some. If there's some tracts that touch yours that look like similar to yours and you can lump it in, sometimes you can you know, join up enough acres. It's kind of a challenging procurement issue for a timber buyer to deal with all the paperwork and make sure that the property line and the definition of who's getting paid for which side of the line is correct. But they'll usually do it if there's enough acres to make it worth their time. Most timber buyers that are buying up tracts in front of their logging crews, they really appreciate the opportunity and put a priority on the opportunity to move their equipment, their logger, to a tract where they think they can be there for a little while. If it's small and they know there's only going to be enough work for them to do for a few days or a week, they're not as interested in it, not nearly as interested in it as they would be if there's enough work for a logger to be able to stay there for a month or so.
All right, we have a question here related to endangered species. The person's wondering about the requirements for complying with the Endangered Species Act. Are small woodlot owners required to do any sort of surveying of their wooded area for endangered bats, for example, prior to any timbering activities?
So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does maintain a website that and I'll send a link to Dr. Barden so he can share it, of that you can use to geographically go into a map and draw an approximate boundary around your tract. And then it will tell you if there are any known threatened or endangered species of plants or animals in that vicinity. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have one. But I will say if you identify that you have an endangered species of animal on your property, that it would be a really good idea to utilize the assistance of a natural resource professional to help you make management decisions and look at guidelines for what you should and shouldn't do to protect that species.
So furs and feathers are the key there. If it's a plant and you're doing a legal operation, you have no obligation to protect that plant. So it's a function of whether it's furred or feathered for the most part. Hope that helps.
All right. Try one more question here. We are at the top of the hour, but we'll do our best to answer at least another one or two. For the select cut on a small lot that you turned into boards, do you recommend a traditional timber sale and a timber rights deed? I think what they're trying to get at is how do you handle the contract associated with where you're having somebody maybe coming in and cutting the trees and then converting them to lumber?
If you're having somebody else do that, having a good contract between you and that person is always a benefit to a landowner, because that can relieve you of liability if somebody's there that gets hurt, and or any other liability that you could have. So I would recommend, and the Forest Service on that on the homepage, there are links to sample timber sale contracts that could be modified pretty easily to use if you were going to have somebody come on your property and do some harvesting and processing of logs into lumber. And I did just put in the chat box the link to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service page that allows you to log in and draw a map of your tract on there to check for invasive species.
And I would, if I heard your question right, it wouldn't involve the typical timber deed, but it would likely be a negotiated sale. And so look for a contract that talks about negotiated sale rather than a timber deed.
All right, next question. Will a forestry consultant charge a fee to small landowners for arranging the sale of timber?
Well, coming from a consultant's perspective, it's hard to pay your bills if you don't charge for services. Now, I am guilty of sometimes I won't charge anybody that calls me for just talking to them on the phone and maybe steering them in the direction of somebody that can help them. But if it's going to involve work on the ground and effort, then yes, they would charge a fee. Sometimes I've had landowners that I would say, I'm not sure if I can get this done. I'm going to try. I'm not going to make you sign any kind of contract with me saying that you owe me a commission if we get this done, until the point that I get where we know there's an option for you to get it done. So that's kind of at the discretion of the consultant, but I think they're going to charge, if they have to come out and take a visit and look at things, they're going to charge you some kind of fee most of the time.
All right, our last question since we're past time, but this question is, how do you know if your woodlot needs management for wildfire prevention?
That would be a good inquiry to the North Carolina Forest Service. If you go back to that homepage that I showed you, and there's a link to, and then type on contacts and then scroll into your county, you'll get a contact for a county ranger there at the county ranger's office. And I would make a phone call there and tell them that that's a concern that you have, and ask that question to them. And they'll usually come out and look and give you some advice, and that's usually at no fee for something like that.
And if you're a quick study, just look up Firewise and defensible space, and you could learn a lot of things that you can do, like not storing firewood next to the house, and pine straw versus cleared lands, and how wide a space away from your property you'd want to protect. And I think Mark gave the example of homesteads in the Piedmont that might have a big forest around them. Defensible space becomes very important there, because if you hope to save the house during a wildfire, you need room for equipment to get in there, but also a protective area. So I'll stop there because I know Bob's looking at the clock.
All right, I'd like to thank you guys for the presentation today very much. And Leslie, any last minute parting words?
No, thank you, Mark and Bob for hosting this event, and all of you for attending. Again, if you want any information about the North Carolina Tree Farm Program, please go to our website at nctreefarm.org or give us a call at 919-917-8646. Thank you so much.